This evening we have, in a sense, one of our own. Roger Owen has been a long-term member of the NEMT. I don't quite know since when, but anyway, he still is, so there must be something going right. As some of you will know, Roger was head of ecology at SEPA, the anti-pollution agency, and apparently he's got a degree in technological economics from the University of Dundee, which not many of us can aspire to, but how much of that will come through, we'll see. He's taking us to a remote part of Europe, which thank goodness is out of the news at the moment, in Albania. I've only been there once, and while I was there, I was woken up in the middle of the night in my hotel by an earthquake. But I don't know if Roger's going to tell us anything quite as exciting as that. I'm sure he will. So over to you, Roger.
Thank you very much, Ken. And it's always a great pleasure to be invited and to speak to North East Mountain Trust. And I want to tell you about a trip that I made in 2019, just before the dreaded pandemic, which was a trip to Albania and the northern, pretty wild part of Albania, along with my two climbing pals, Alistair Bealey and Andy Christie. And I'll just explain to you why I wanted to go there. And it's part of it's part of a bigger project, I guess, and that's to climb the highest points of every country in Europe, which is something I've been beavering away at for a little while. And just to show you, all the red dots here are the ones I've climbed, and all the blue mountain peaks are the ones I haven't. And so the idea of this trip here was, if you can see my cursor, there's a little bunch here. We're a group of high points of countries that were in or around Albania. So there's 4 of them in that cluster there. These ones here might prove difficult now in the current circumstances, but the Baltic states and Belarus were ones I'd planned to do in 2020 until the pandemic struck, unfortunately. And Belarus and Ukraine are on my list, but fortunately it's on the same list as Vladimir Putin. So I'm not quite sure who's going to get there first. Just to show you, I'm sure you know this, but where Albania is in the Adriatic, borders the Adriatic Sea here, one of the Balkan countries, Greece to the south, and Serbia and Bosnia and Croatia and Macedonia here surrounding it. This is Albania. It's actually less than half the size of Scotland, but a very rich country in many ways, as you'll find out. And we were in the north. We from Tirana, we travelled around the borders, essentially, dodging in and out of different countries and back to Tirana. And I'll tell you something about Tirana when we come to the end. But here's our itinerary. And we did join a group of people who were doing this, arranged by one of the trekking companies. But we travelled from Tirana, which is out of the picture here, firstly to Mount Korab, which luckily for us is the highest point of both Albania and North Macedonia. So that was 2 for the price of 1. And then we travelled by road, crossed over into Kosovo. We stayed in Kosovo, in Jakovi, and then we moved on to climb the highest point of Kosovo, Mount Jarvika, and then trekked for 3 days in and out of Kosovo, Albania, and Montenegro, finally climbing the highest point of Montenegro, Zirkulata, trekking back out to Kukaj, and then by road and by boat back to Tirana. So this is our first starting point, if you like. This is the village of Radomir, which is in the start point for Mount Korab. You'll notice the mosque. About 60% of Albania is Muslim. About 35% is Catholic. Our guide told us that the reason for that is because when the Ottoman Empire invaded and was moving northwards, it came to this very rugged mountains and thought, it is proving a bit difficult. So the Catholic community suggested that they pay taxes instead, and the Ottomans said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So that's why the northern western parts of Albania are Catholic. This is the first site we had. This is actually shot through the windows of our transport up there. But this was the first site we have of Korab. All of these mountains are karst mountains. They're limestone mountains, and they're wild, rugged, lots of forest. But in the summer, no running water really, because it all sinks in through the limestones. So we didn't see any running rivers or running streams as such. And it was quite warm, I would say, often up to about 30 degrees. Anyhow, this is us starting our trek to Korab, and the locals, generally still very agricultural, horseback, this guy bringing his milk down from the pastures. And this guy in the red is our guide, our Albanian guide, a student, but who was a very, very smart guy. And his name is Albert. Now, I'm not sure if his name's Albert in Albanian, but he told us his name was Albert, and that's what we called him. He was a really, really good guide, very knowledgeable, told us lots of stuff about history and biodiversity and so on, politics. In any case, this is us setting off. And you'll see Korab itself away up to the top left-hand side there. It's 2,751 meters. And so that day, we have a 1,500 meter climb and a 16-kilometer trek, coming back the same way. And this is the kind of wonderfully beautiful terrain in this part of the world. Now, there's a lot of wildlife in Albania, as we'll come to later in this talk. But there's some wolves, and there's bear, and there's lynx. But I have to say, the most dangerous animal we came across was dogs. And this is Andy looking at a dog who's circling him. And of course, the reason is because the reason for these dogs is because of these guys. I didn't take that photograph, as I'm sure you appreciate. But in Albania, there are about 1,000 wolves. That's the European country with probably the most wolves. And these wolves do, obviously, and they do prey on livestock. And they follow the livestock up and down from summer pastures to lower down the mountain in the winter. And the reason for the dogs is because they stay with the sheep, as in quite a few Central European countries have dogs like that stay with the sheep all the time, and they protect the sheep from the wolves. For the same reason, the shepherds are out here all the time too, in these high pastures in the summer. So the thing is, if you want to go by, then you really have to negotiate with a shepherd who can call his dogs off, because the dogs won't let you by if you're going to go anywhere near their sheep. But the shepherds, of course, are very accommodating and realize that you're only you're trekkers and you're trying to get somewhere, so they'll just call the dogs off. So our guide negotiated passage that way. And this is having negotiated passage. This is on our way to a pass called the Korab Gate, which is It itself is right on the border between North Macedonia and Albania. And this is the pass itself, Korab Gate. And we're admiring the view over into North Macedonia, which I'll show you in a second. And the summit path, which goes all the way to Korab Mountain, the one in the distance there. And reaching the summit of Korab Mountain at 2751 meters, it's interesting to see, if you see on the bottom of that pretty modern looking sign, USAID. And USAID is a US development charity which provides funding for developments in countries like Albania. And that particular project was about opening up the north of Macedonia to trekking. And so they have been investing in paths and investing in helping people to provide support services for trekking. It's still a pretty new phenomenon in the north of, in Albania altogether, really, but especially in the north mountainous region. And on the summit, but looking over to the national park in North Macedonia of Morovo National Park, another wild and beautiful place, but tremendous place to be. And I just want to show you now that that was kind of us having done Korab, I want, if I can put my cursor. Yeah, doesn't matter. You see Mount Korab down there in the bottom of the picture. So we're going to drive now, as I said, across the border in Kosovo. We're going to spend the night in Kosovo in Jakovi before moving on to start our walking trek. But I just wanted to show you this. I know this looks like a pretty awful photograph, but this is out of the window of our bus, but this is a really, really modern road that's been constructed between the Pristina in Kosovo and all the way down to the Adriatic coast. And it's a 4-lane highway, which they're very proud of. But they're not too proud to let the cattle walk down it, same time as you're trying to drive up it. Well, it's pretty interesting that that's how they regard that development. But in Kosovo, we went to this place, this hotel, this wonderful hotel, really beautiful hotel in Jakovi. Its name of the hotel is the Bazaar of Jupavi, and the whole place is built on the site of an old bazaar. But interestingly, here is the two Land Rovers that we're going to be transported from here on tracks to our starting point of our trek, and they're from a company called Outdoor Kosovo, and so they are, they've begun to do this. They've begun to provide these kind of outdoor trekking sorts of services. We did go for a little wander, of course, around the hotel. I haven't got time to show you very much, but I'd show you this. Which I found fascinating was that around the corner from this hotel was this bar, and it was a burger bar. And for some reason, they felt that the English word chronic was a really good thing to use to advertise their burger bar, chronic burgers. I don't think they really quite understood it, but finding an English word like that is always felt to be really cool in some of these countries. But unintended consequences are anyway, onto the head of our trail, this is where we're going to have to get out and walk. And of course, we have some baggage here, and we're about to embark on a 3-day trek, which will cover 53 kilometers and another just over 3,000 meters climbing, 3,500 meters of climbing in 3 days. And we've got these big bags. So what we're going to do about it? Well, of course, we had we have a trump card, and that is that our guide has hired local horsemen who are going to carry our bags. But on our this is us now heading up to the highest point of Kosovo, and the first day, Jerevice, which is 2,656 meters. It's a fairly steep ascent. The horses went up that, and again, it's a beautiful day, beautiful weather for an ascent like that. And on the way, we passed Lake Jerevice. Our actual route goes along to the left here and then up that ridge behind and all the way up to the top. Beautiful lake. Interesting thing was, when we got here, there was a guy sunbathing, and I don't know whether he just whipped his shorts back on when we arrived or not, but he was on his own. I think he was more surprised to see us than we would see him. And looking out over the wild landscapes of Kosovo and Albania here, again, all these vast mountains, wonderful forests in the background. And on the top of the highest point of Kosovo, it was a great place to be. Hardly any wind, as you can see from the flag. Great occasion. And then we're descending from that pretty steeply into a wonderful remote valley called Dobrdal, and to some accommodation down there. And again, you see all these forests. We're in a range of mountains called the Accursed Mountains. Part of the Alpine mountain ranges coming southwards, and these forests are inhabited by quite a lot of wildlife, as I'll explain in a minute. And it was warm, and there was opportunity taken for some swimming on the way down. Very welcome for some of us to take a dip. Enjoy that. And looking out over into Kosovo, but also into Montenegro now. Interesting peak just in the foreground there, which it seems to have just been sliced off with a knife, doesn't it? And there had been, obviously, in the past, glacial action in these mountains, because you can see with all the corries and so on. But the most southern permanent ice in Europe is in these mountains in Albania. Now, a baggage train coming up behind, and thank God they were carrying it. And we're going to move on to our night stop in Dobrdal, which is just a tiny little hamlet. But first we have to pass through some of these woodlands, these pine and beech woodlands, which are what forms most of the wooded forested areas in northern Albania. And this is our little night stop, and you see the welcoming smoke. And they're only just in this part of the world. They really are only just realizing that people like us are willing to pay money to find some accommodation there. They really, they hadn't really thought of it all that much before. So as we're walking into this, I'm like, you see this kind of almost hurriedly written on the roof there, guest house written there. And they've built what they call a guest house for us, for trekkers like us. You see, there's some people camping up there in the top right too. But the what amused me was that they said in the itinerary, it says that the guest house here is rather like a Scottish bothy, and I don't think so. This is a little bit more spruce than a Scottish bothy, but it is a question of just laying out mattresses, mats, and things. So this is the kind of dinner that the local people there provided for us, and you really just have to take what they have. They're not importing special stuff for you as a trekker. They're just providing you with their local produce, and so things like the tomatoes and the peppers and the flatbreads that you see there. That probably, I don't know, our most favourite produce was boiled sheep's cheese, which they liked to provide. It was okay. It was okay, but needs must. It was beautifully served, and of course they did manage to import some beer for us, though, so that was good. And our horses are happily grazing outside, ready to move on the next day. And so that was Mount Javica that we had done, and we had stayed in Doberal there, and we're just going to move on now to another village, Sarami, before we climb Zia Pilata, which is the height point of Negro. What we're doing with that red line, you can see up to the top there, is that we're dodging in and out of Kosovo, back into Albania, into Montenegro, back into Albania, and then at the highest point of Montenegro, and then back into Albania. So it's really moving along that border, in and out of it. And this really is a beautiful landscape, and the forests cover about 30% of Albania as a whole, much more so in the north, as opposed to what, 17-18% of Scotland with woodland and forest. 30% of Albania has these pine and beech forests. And of course, there is some wildlife in these forests, including bears and brown bears. I didn't take that photograph either, but I didn't. But there are brown bear. There are something like 200 brown bear in Albania, mostly in the north and east part. I did attempt humour with our guide Albert, who was quite a funny guy actually, but he was talking about bear, and we were coming across some signs of bear. I mean, big scratch marks on trees, that's one thing, but of course bear droppings are the other. And I did say to our guide that there's only one way to tell whether it's bear dropping, is because you can find pepper spray cans in it. And he looked at me very quizzically for a while before he laughed, but I think he got it in the end. So the other thing that's in these forests, of course, is European lynx. Unfortunately, there's only about 20 of them left in northern Albania, as far as I can tell. And the local people, although there are strict laws in Albania to protect wildlife, and they have quite a lot of protected site habitats, the local people, of course, a lot of the time ignore laws, and you can still find skins of lynx in various places, in other villages and so on. So, and of course, they worry about their stock, but the lynx is much more likely to hunt deer, things like roe deer or chamois and so on. So, but they're still being persecuted, I fear. And there are around 20 of them, as I think. Our horses overtaking us again as we were going through these woodlands areas. But these meadows, these high alpine meadows, are the other feature of this kind of landscape. And I just want to say something about biodiversity now. I'm going to say one thing is, having just talked about bear and lynx, you try not to be the last person in the party crossing the meadow, but you're aware of them being around. And I also wanted to say, just make this point that I also came across wood sorrel in the woodlands there. Wood sorrel, we have it. Oxalis acidocella, which a lot of people used to use for flavorings here at one time. And if you bite it, it's got a little really nice tangy acid taste. But I asked our guide Albert, who was talking a lot about local plants and medicinal herbs and about what they used for cooking with and so on. He didn't seem to know about wood sorrel, strangely. So I got him to taste some, taste that acid nature of it. But to the consternation of some of the other clients in this group who said that they hoped that I knew what I was doing, but they didn't know the way. So it didn't seem to do him any harm anyway. What about this biodiversity? Yeah, here's, Albania is just an amazing place for biodiversity for a small country. It has both a Mediterranean and an alpine climate, and they come together in Albania. It has, so here's some wild crocus growing. And it has these wonderful meadows like this. In fact, there are 3,200 species of plants in Albania, whereas there are only 1,800 in the whole of the UK. And there are, just to pick another couple of examples, they have 36 species of reptile, where we have 4. They have 520 kinds of snails, mollusks, where we have 147. They even have 20 species of bat, where we only have 10. So, the biodiversity is just huge and really spectacular. In fact, one of the other remarkable things is that when it comes to things like the sorts of herbs that you'd come across, they have 14 different kinds of wild thyme, 6 different kinds of mint and lavender and rosemary, and they have 16 different kinds of sage plant. So, as someone remarked, just walking along is an aromatic wonderland. It's a beautiful odor to everything. And they have orchids, and they also have lots and lots of fruit and these plum trees and so on. They grow loads and loads of plum trees. But here's an interesting thing. They also, and I'm just showing you some other ones like poppy and so on that you can find all over the place. But this is a remarkable one. This is saffron. And saffron comes from this saffron crocus. And they're growing this now in Albania. They're cultivating it. And saffron is pretty valuable because I think 1 kilogram of saffron is worth $3,000. The only thing is it takes 250,000 crocuses to make a kilogram of saffron. So they're cultivating it like that. So you'll find this saffron crocus now in many parts of Albania. It's worth quite a bit of money. Most saffron actually comes from Iran. Well, Albania is trying to get on the bandwagon. And as we're going along, of course, we're going through other sorts of small hamlets and habitations. And here's one where they're providing us with some lunch. And they're really friendly. I have to say that the Albanian people, and then those in the mountains too, are very, very friendly to people like us, to hikers. Not that they've come across that many yet, but they realize, of course, that they can make a little bit of money out of it, but it's more than that. They really are just very, very hospitable. But maybe more so to us than they are to each other. And I just wanted to, I don't know if you've heard of this thing called the canon, which is the canon, which, canons, which are doctrines. But essentially, unfortunately, there's still this tradition of Jakmara, which is bloodletting in Albania, and especially in the north and in the mountains and in some of the villages, where essentially it's a sort of revenge culture. It's still pretty well, it's pretty crude and pretty barbaric, and it's still being practiced quite a lot. So essentially, if you commit some sort of, they consider to be a crime against a family, then you've got to pay that debt with the life of one of your own family members. And if you don't do it, they will. So they some of the crimes that you might commit, which they feel requires that debt to be paid, is killing of a guest. Well, I can see that. Violation of property, failure to pay a debt, and the seduction of a woman. Well, I presume seduction of a woman that they didn't want you to seduce. But anyway, seems a very strange one. But they want that. They will seek revenge killings for that. And now you think that's really old-fashioned. And the government of Albania are in despair at this and are desperately trying to stamp it out. The current, in 2020, they reckon 704 families were still affected with this. And 591 of them were in Albania. The other 113 had left the country because of the revenge. And apparently, if you didn't settle that debt with the life of your family member, then you were condemned to stay inside your house. And this also transmitted down generations. So if your father's generation committed the crime and hadn't paid the debt, then your generation had to pay it. So it's unfortunate that that's still going on in Albania to an extent, but hopefully the government will get on top of it. Anyway, to move on, here's some of the produce that this is kind of stuff they find in the forests, meadows and so on, which they're drying, selling off to market. And here's a long drop toilet, which is in the fork of a tree, which was, I don't think it was being used. I think it was a bit of a ruin now, but interesting to see that as well. However, as we were moving back into Albania, we were met by the border police. Here's the border policeman, anyway, and he'd come up the track to meet us because he knew we were moving into area. In this part of the world, there used to be, when Albania was communist and very, very inward looking, and it had border posts everywhere because it tried to prevent the smuggling of goods and movement of people across these borders in and out of Montenegro and places like that. So these tracks were being used by border guards and police. But here's a friendly policeman who's met us, and he's just checking on us as we're moving back down into Albania. Part of the reason might have been because we were going to stay at his sister's place here in the village of Srami. Note the satellite dish. And we stayed here for one night before moving back up into Montenegro. But here's a sort of wiring problem that mind you, I've seen that in many parts of the world, but here's, I wouldn't like to try to sort that lot out if it was a power cut. And again, they gave us food to, for lunch and so on, but you help yourself and you have what they can grow or make. So there's the boiled sheep's cheese, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, the flatbread and the apple juice and so on, but that's what they can give you. And you're welcome. So that was the village of Srami, and where I'm just going to show you the ascent of Zirkalata now, which is the highest point of Montenegro. And again, this is going through wonderful meadows. I have to say Zirkalata was one of the toughest of the ones we did in Albania. It's 2,534 meters. And again, today, this day is another 1,500 meter climb and a 15-kilometer walk in a pretty warm temperature. Again, it's limestone. There's karst mountains, pretty rugged. This is Alistair, my friend Alistair, who's walking up. And this is my friend Alistair, who always takes advantage of an opportunity to have a nap. So he's conserving his energy. And notice he's sleeping in one of these wonderful wildflower meadows. But we reached this col, and this is the mountain ahead of us with snow in the corrie. And it's kind of turned out to be quite a scramble to get to the top of this thing. We're moving on a path. You can see several of us there moving on a path. But it's quite rugged. And what we are doing is going to move up that skyline in front of us and onto the top. And there's my friend Andy on the top. And what a great view of the accursed mountains and the accursed mountain range, all these jaggedy peaks way over in Montenegro. Astonishingly, here's this couple down to the right-hand side of Andy, having walked all the way up there and looking pretty cold as well. Now, this became quite an adventure because what I could see coming was some pretty horrible, dark storm clouds. And Albert said, we might get a little bit of rain. But I know a storm when I see one. and it really turned out to be one horrific storm that we got caught in. Oh, but before I do that, I'll just say, looking to the west in the valley of the Drin, and you might wonder what that is, the streak of white. Is that water? No, it's not. It's just the bed of a river, limestone boulders on it. There's no water there, as I'll show you later on. Interesting. But anyway, that storm came, and as we descended, we had lightning. I'd never have lightning so close as that, and it was pelting hailstones the size of golf balls. It was pretty awful. God knows what happened to that couple that were up there. But we went on down, and it's not a very good picture, but when we got down, we had a camp. Our only camp of the whole expedition was here, and the horsemen had come and set up camp for us. And we really appreciated that, because they were pretty clever at finding ways of cooking food for us, and dire condition there. If you wanted tea, the horsemen grabbed a bunch of oregano from the nearest field and just bunged that in some hot water for you, and that was tea. No shortage of things to make tea with that were growing there. And this is a pretty wet and dreary and camp. Funnily, Andy, who was sleeping in this tent, had, in the middle of the night, when it was pitch black, had for a call of nature, and he sort of blundered out of the tent in the middle of the night, straight into one of the horses, which was grazing nearby. And in pitch black, he was trying to orientate himself with horses and tents and find his way back, but he did it in the end. But this is us coming back down now from that campsite, and this is the valley of the Drin. And again, this is not water, this is just a bed of a river. And you can see how in the wintertime it must flood hugely, but that is no water there to be seen. It's running underneath it, but that's just lots and lots and lots of limestone boulders. And looking across it, the sort of plain of boulders to Courage, where we were staying. And that's the end of the walking part. And we were then transported from there to Fierza, where we were to embark on a ferry boat along a very, very long lake. And here's the ferry boat. And this is before they built a proper road. a few miles away from here. This was the way that people got up and down, was using these ferry boats to get along this very long lake. And interesting thing was that it did take cars, but every time they load the ramp, the crew had to run out with shovels and shovel some soil onto the ramp in order to create so that the cars wouldn't hit, in the because of the steep slope. So they shoveled soil to make an earthen ramp, and they did that every single time. But this was one hell of a really, really great trip. I've never been on a ferry boat like this before. This was a beautiful lake, but I just wanted to point out the best vantage spot had been taken over by this man in the white shirt in the middle here, who's sitting down, who's got a whole bunch of people around him, and they'd set up a table and a cloth, and he was being served food by these people. I reckon he was local mafia, but he got the best spot. And we were sailing through this Kamani Lake, Long Kamani Lake, for a couple of hours on this ferry boat. Here's another one passing by, a small one passing by us. It's a gorge, and you're going through this incredible gorge as you're traveling along. Beautiful place. Kamani Lake, and I just thought it was quite amusing to see that once you got to their end, you're welcomed by this sign that says, translated for you in English too, which says, "Please enjoy this place of God's as your home. Please respect and keep it clean. There are no trashes in heaven." Well, does he really know that? Anyway, I guess not. We're now on our way to Tirana. We've done our walking and our climbing, and we're going to Tirana, the capital, Albania. They don't seem to have much of a problem with driving pointed agricultural vehicles along their main roads, which I think we would have a problem with. But still, that's fine. And as we're driving on, going to Tirana, you'll see signs of the Ottoman occupation. Later occupied by the Ottomans up as far as Tirana for sure. And this is Tirana itself, a city that not many people have visited, but is so attractive in many ways. It's got, as I said, it's got the Alpine region meeting the Adriatic. Very underdeveloped region. The Adriatic coast of Albania has many, many miles of beach, hardly any tourist development there. Our guide was hopeful that, he said, well, it's coming, we realise that, but hopefully we can learn the lessons and not overdevelop it, like many other places have on the Mediterranean coast. But interesting thing is that I think 36% or 38% of Albanians no longer live in Albania. And this is not all, I mean, a lot of people think of Albanians in places like London and Albanian gangs and so on. The vast, vast majority of Albanians that have moved abroad are just seeking good jobs and a better standard of living. They're intelligent, smart people, and they're just seeking a better quality of life. So the government is doing all it can to keep them there and trying to attract them. In fact, it's provided really good subsidies for having family. You get €350 for one child, 600 for the two children, and €750 a year for three children. They're trying to make life attractive. And this is a centre of Tirana, Skanderbeg Square. As you can see, it looks very vibrant, very, very, very cosmopolitan in some ways. This is famous hero from the past that they celebrate. They call this Skanderbeg Square, and this gentleman on a horse is Georgi Kastrioti, who in the 15th century managed to hold the Ottomans off. He held them off for years and years, decades. In the northern part, a particular part of Albania, but he was just a military genius, and he used the landscape, and he had armies that were a third of the size of the Ottoman armies, and he still managed to defeat them time and time and time again. So they felt that he was a bit of a hero that deserved to be put on a horse in the middle of Tirana, I guess. And here's an interesting thing. This is called the Enver Hoxha Museum. And Enver Hoxha, who was the communist head of state in Albania from 1944 to 1985, so that's 41 years. He was head of state in Tirana. He had this built as his mausoleum. It never became his mausoleum, but he had it built as his mausoleum. And you can see what the locals think about it with all the graffiti and so on. Apparently the children slide down it, and but it's now a conference centre. But Enver Hoxha was a paranoid, and he was paranoid that Albania would get invaded, and he was paranoid that it would be subject to nuclear attack too. And he had these pillboxes built, and there are 176,000 pillboxes for Albania, similar to this, some bigger than this, and all now used for different purposes. But this is one in the middle, several of these surrounding what was the government part of Tirana, and he had these pillboxes there because he was paranoid about invasions. And in the same part of green part of Tirana, you'll find a statue to this chap called Ismail Kemal, who was the first ever prime minister before the communist era, first ever prime minister Albania when it became independent in 1912 from the Ottomans. The British had a lot to do with getting it to become independent, hold off the other Balkan states from dividing it up between them too. But Ismail Kemal had a lot to do with the British. But he died in when he was in his mid-70s in Italy. But he was another hero. And so is Mother Teresa, who some of you will probably know was an Albanian. But because she left Albania and most of her works were in India and other places, but she couldn't come back to Albania while Enver Hoxha was there. Once he had passed away, she did come back, and they erected this in her honor. So Mother Teresa Square is there in Tirana. And I just wondered if you could tell, no, you probably understand a diagrammatic instruction or warning about what this actually tells you. And it's telling you not to do a certain thing in this park. And it's telling you that if you did, you'll be on CCTV. And if you do that, they'll post it on YouTube. So I wonder how many people have seen themselves on YouTube. Coming towards the end, and I just wanted to mention the Enver Hoxha bunker, which is in underground bunker in Tirana, which our guide insisted that we go to see. He said, I'm not being paid to take you around this, but I think you should see it. It's a 59-room bunker on 5 floors, and this is where Enver Hoxha was going to hole out in case of nuclear war. And he had all kinds of rooms with all kinds of communication equipment, and the lounge and bedrooms and so on, and very austere-looking toilet. And this is one of the soldiers' rooms that were to guard him, and this is the equipment the soldier had, which included, you just see how paranoid Enver Hoxha was. But in any case, Locals now, there was a kind of counter-revolution in about 1990s, 95, where the communist rule ended. It became a democratic rather than a communist one. And of course, the local people now don't really celebrate the memory of Enver Hoxha. In fact, they dug him up out of the place he was originally buried, which was a nice place overlooking Tirana, and they went and reburied him in the local public cemetery somewhere. But then here's a model in the bunker that the locals have kind of used a pair of socks to sort of make fun of it. But modern day Tirana is really got a cafe culture now. They're being developed a lot. It's a great place to go. It's a beautiful place in many respects. It's not yet got many tourists, but they will be coming, I'm pretty sure. And a friend, one of the group told us that he spent a couple of months here before he came on the walk in the northern part. He said it was a really nice place to be. And there was only one bomb went off while he was there. Sort of a bit of gang warfare going on. But he said other than that, it was quiet. So I'm sure it's a great place to visit. And I think I'm going to leave it there. And thank you very much for listening. And you should make it out to Albania when you can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. That's an excellent trip round, and that puts you well on track for your country summits, I believe. Well, we'll open it up for questions. I think there might be a few questions. If people want to put those in the chat, I will do my best to read those through. In fact, there's one there already from Ken. How are the forests managed? Is there any over or under exploitation?
Yes, Ken, there is a forestry service in Albania, a government department, and they are exploiting the forests. There is a worry that the forests, the natural forests, are still being exploited, and that there is a slow decrease in habitat. But they have a plan to manage that exploitation, and so they are making more and more areas protected. The other thing is that, of course, they do have planted forests, commercial forestry, and so there is a timber industry there. But the government are certainly trying to manage that as best they can.
Okay, and one from James. What is the general attitude regarding conservation and biodiversity? Are the 20 links going to have a productive future?
That's a good question. The government is very keen to manage for conservation, and it has some pretty strict environmental laws which is enacted. It has Ramsar sites. It's part of the international conservation effort. It does recognize that Albania has this very special place in all of this, as does a lot of Europe realize that Albania has a very special place. And it does have these environmental laws, and it has departments and government departments whose responsibility it is to manage that. But I have to say that in those very places where the natural environment is best in the north and of the country, the local population are less likely to manage to comply, if you like, with those laws. And it's well known that they still illegally log or just get timber, but largely that's for their own use and own purposes. It's not that they're logging like in the Amazon to try and sell it off to somebody else. They're kind of logging for themselves, if you like. But they're also trying to stop them from over exploiting herbs and plants like that, which they pick and sell in the markets. So they're trying to educate them out of that and persuade them that there is a sustainable level at which they can exploit those sorts of things. So there's a tension between what the government is trying to do and what some of the local people are actually doing. But they're hoping to tip that balance, I guess.
You spoke about them having far more species than we have here in the UK. Do you think that's always been the case? Do you think we have lost more species than them? Or do they naturally have more and a better conservation, whether it's natural conservation or otherwise?
Well, firstly, I think that they would always have had more species than we would have had naturally because of that conjunction of different climates and different habitats, the regional, alpine and Mediterranean climates, and the limestone soils and the temperatures and so on, and enough rainfall. Having said that, there's absolutely no doubt at all that the UK has lost a huge number of species due to the overexploitation of our own habitats. I mean, Scotland itself has only got 17% of land cover as forestry. You'll know all of these arguments, and UK as a whole is even less, whereas Albania has still got at least a third of the country in natural forest. So there's no doubt at all that we've lost many, many, many species in the UK. But I do believe, even if we hadn't, that Albania would still have quite a lot more than we have naturally.
You showed shepherds early on in your talk and talked about the dogs to keep the wolves at bay. Where were the shepherds living? Were they in tents? It was a summer pasture.
No, the shepherds are staying in the sorts of hamlets that you saw us staying in. These are high. They're not there in the winter. Those hamlets are not inhabited. Those little clusters of houses are not inhabited in the winter. So they go down to the villages then. So in the summer they're inhabiting the huts that you see. Of course, the hut that they'd built for tourists was a bit different, but the kind of little stone-built houses is where the shepherds are staying, much like it would have been the case in Scotland, in 100 years ago.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else has questions. I wonder if you've got a favorite country peak so far.
In Europe.
That you visited.
Yeah.
Apart from Ben Nevis, of course.
Actually, the best and most memorable peak would have been Denali, Mount McKinley in Alaska. But in Europe, I would have said that in terms of a country high point, Monte Rosa, which is a good icy arete.
Mm-hmm. And another question from James, assuming that from the green and the flowers that you visited early in the year and later it turns brown, how does Albania secure a good water supply?
There are many natural lakes in Albania, but there are also many artificial reservoirs, lakes that have been turned into reservoirs. in Albania. There are probably 500 or 600, 700 lakes and reservoirs that are big ones for water supply. So, you know, it's catching its winter snows and the rainfall that does occur. And I'm pretty sure that there will be some rivers that are issuing from the subterranean limestone karst bedrocks in many places too.
Okay, I have one last question. You don't have many European country peaks still on the tick list. Do you have one that is accessible?
Well, my next plan is to go to Slovenia and climb Triglav, which I haven't managed to do yet. I did go there once, but the weather wasn't good enough. So I'll be off to Slovenia hopefully towards the end of this year. So that's one. Then it will be the Serbia, Bosnia, and Romania on the list. I think those are accessible.
Yeah.
and the one I'm leaving for last is Northern Ireland.
Yes, I noticed that Northern Ireland was still a blue mountain. Okay, thank you very much for that. I will ask Ken to say a few words.
Well, yes. Can I just thank you, Roger, on behalf of everybody here for that talk. Certainly, Tirana's come on a bit. I mean, I was there mid-90s, I think, and I do remember Skanderbeg is a square, but it certainly wasn't quite up to the standard that you showed. And so they've obviously done a lot there, both public and private, looking at the buildings to start the place up, and makes it look a very attractive place. As you say, one hopes the country won't be overexploited. All these Albanians living abroad are probably saving money to go back and build a little chalet somewhere on the best possible place, without too much concern for the look of the landscape roundabout. But let's hope that it works out. So thank you very much for an interesting and unusual talk, and all the best on Triglav, which is a good hill, especially if you do it from the lake side. I've forgotten what the lake's called, Lake Bled or something. Very good hill. As Donald mentioned at the beginning, we have an extra talk this year, this spring, on the, now let me get this right, Donald, if you've got, is it 21st of April, here we are, which is by Anna Fleming, who's written a guide to rock climbing, and I hope that will be of interest to many people here when that time comes along. So once again, thanks very much, Roger, and thank you for everybody for tuning in this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent.